Once upon a time, in a small, peaceful village nestled between rolling hills and whispering streams, there lived a man named Liam. He was a kind-hearted, hard-working soul, the sort of person who'd stop to help a neighbor fix a fence or carry firewood for an elder without a second thought. The villagers respected him not just for his strength, but for the quiet goodness that seemed to shine through his every action. Liam's life revolved around his humble home, where he lived with his mother Evelyn, a woman whose presence was as comforting as the warm glow of a hearth. Evelyn was elderly now, her hair silver and her steps slow, but her eyes still sparkled with the same love they'd held when Liam was a boy. Back then, she'd been his whole world. She'd spoon-fed him warm porridge when he was too small to hold a spoon, sat by his bedside with cool cloths when fevers raged, and stitched his torn clothes with hands that never seemed to tire. Even in the leanest winters when the wind howled through the cracks of their little house, Evelyn made sure Liam's belly was full, even if it meant she went without. Liam loved her more than words could ever express, a bond forged through years of her unwavering care. One crisp autumn day, while working a temporary job in the bustling city nearby, Liam's life took an unexpected turn. He met a woman named Sophie. She was strikingly beautiful, with eyes that danced like sunlight on water and a smile that could melt the coldest heart. Sophie was young, full of energy, and carried herself with a confidence that drew people in. Liam was smitten almost instantly. He couldn't take his eyes off her as she laughed at something he'd said, her voice like music over the clamor of the city streets. Sophie was everything he'd ever dreamed of in a partner. She was sharp-witted, always ready with a clever remark, and had a way of making even the dullest moments sparkle with her humor. They spent weeks getting to know each other. Long walks by the river, shared meals at little cafes, and quiet evenings where Liam would listen, enchanted as she spoke of her dreams. After a few blissful months, he gathered his courage, knelt beneath a blooming cherry tree, and asked her to marry him. Sophie's face lit up, and with a resounding yes, she made it the happiest day of Liam's life. Eager to share his joy, Liam brought Sophie back to his village, to the simple home he shared with Evelyn. At first, everything was like a dream. Evelyn welcomed Sophie with open arms, her wrinkled face beaming as she prepared a hearty stew to celebrate their arrival. Sophie seemed delighted too, charmed by the quaint village and the warmth of Evelyn's embrace. The three of them laughed together over meals, and Liam felt his heart swell with gratitude for the two women he loved most. But as the weeks turned into months, a shadow began to creep over their harmony. Sophie started to feel uneasy living under the same roof as Evelyn. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just small things that grated on her. She didn't like how Evelyn's voice carried a hint of authority when she offered advice, or the way the older woman's eyes seemed to follow her every move as if silently judging. Sophie, so used to her independence in the city, began to feel stifled, trapped in a house that wasn't fully hers. One chilly evening, Liam trudged home from a grueling day at work, his shoulders aching and his stomach growling. He'd spent hours in the fields helping a neighbor with the harvest, and all he could think about was the warm meal waiting for him. But when he pushed open the door, the house felt different. Sophie sat on the couch, her arms crossed tightly, her face clouded with frustration. The usual aroma of dinner was absent, and the silence was heavy. "Sophie," Liam said gently, setting his coat aside, "I'm starving after today. Could you bring me something to eat?" Sophie didn't look up. Her voice was sharp as she replied, "There's no food." Liam frowned, caught off guard. Normally, Sophie cooked while Evelyn rested her weary bones. "What do you mean? Why isn't there any food?" he asked, stepping closer, his tone soft but confused. Sophie shot to her feet, her cheeks flushed with anger. "Your mother's why?" she burst out. "She humiliated me today, called me lazy, said I'm useless around here. I've had enough, Liam. I can't live like this." Liam's stomach twisted. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What did she say to you exactly?" "She's old, Sophie. Sometimes her words come out harsher than she means." But Sophie wasn't in the mood for explanations. "I don't care how old she is. I hate her, Liam. I won't stay in this house with her another day. You need to choose, me or your mother." The words hit him like a thunderclap. His heart sank into a cold, dark pit. How could she ask him to make such an impossible choice? He loved Sophie with every fiber of his being, but Evelyn was his foundation, the woman who'd shaped him into the man he was. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, his mind spinning like a storm. Sophie's beauty, her laughter, her vibrancy, they filled his thoughts. She was right about one thing. She was young, radiant, and he might never find someone like her again if she left. But then there was Evelyn, the woman who'd rocked him to sleep as a child, who'd gone hungry so he wouldn't, who'd taught him what love truly meant. How could he turn his back on her now, when she needed him most? By morning, Liam sat slumped at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands, exhaustion and despair weighing him down. Sophie walked in, her posture rigid with determination. She stood before him, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Liam, you know what you have to do. I'm young. I'm beautiful. You'll regret it if I walk away. If you want me to stay, make your choice. I won't live like this." Liam lifted his gaze, his eyes rimmed with sorrow. Sophie's beauty was undeniable, and his love for her burned bright. But his bond with Evelyn was unbreakable. That afternoon he made a terrible, heart-wrenching decision. He'd heard old tales from the village, stories of people who, in desperation, took their elderly parents to the mountains and left them there when they could no longer care for them. It was a brutal, shameful act, but Liam felt trapped, his options dwindling. He approached Evelyn with a forced smile. "Mom, let's go for a walk," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Evelyn's face lit up. She'd loved any chance to spend time with her son. She pulled on her shawl and they set off together, her frail hand tucked into the crook of his arm as they began the long climb up the mountain path. The air grew thinner as they ascended, the trees thinning out to reveal a stark, wind-swept ridge. Liam's chest tightened with every step. Evelyn moved slowly, her breathing labored, but she didn't complain. She never did. She chatted softly about the flowers they passed, the way the village looked so small below them, her voice a soothing hum against the growing storm in Liam's heart. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the peak. The wind whipped around them, tugging at Evelyn's shawl. Liam stopped, his pulse pounding in his ears. He scanned the barren landscape, grappling for the strength to say what he'd planned. But before he could utter a word, Evelyn turned to him, her eyes soft and knowing. "Careful, son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I understand why you brought me here. You don't need to say it. Just promise me you'll be safe going back down." Her words broke him. Tears sprang to his eyes as memories flooded in. Evelyn singing him lullabies, stitching his socks by candlelight, her tired hands kneading bread dough to keep him fed. How could he have even thought of this? Standing there on that cold, lonely summit, Liam crumpled. Tears streamed down his face as the wind carried away his resolve. all he could hear were the echoes of Evelyn's voice from years past. Her gentle songs, her stories told by the fire, her laughter when he'd stumble home muddy and grinning. Guilt crashed over him like a wave. Evelyn stood beside him, silent and steady, her frail hand resting on his arm. She didn't look angry or betrayed, just calm, as if she'd already made peace with whatever he chose. "Son," she said again, her voice clear despite the wind. "I know life's been heavy for you lately. Sophie's your wife, and I see how much you love her. It's not easy juggling everything, but I'm your mother. Mothers don't walk away from their children, not when they're young and not when they're old. Don't worry about me. You've always done your best." Her words cut deeper than any blade. How could she still put him first, even now, when he'd brought her here to abandon her? Liam sank to his knees, sobbing like a child. Evelyn knelt beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he choked out, his voice raw. "I don't know what I was thinking. I can't leave you here." Evelyn reached out, her trembling hand brushing through his hair as she'd done when he was small. "I understand, Liam. You're caught in a hard place. But love isn't about choosing one person over another. It's about finding a way to hold space for everyone, even when it hurts." Her wisdom settled into him, heavy and true. After a long, tear-streaked moment, Liam stood and helped Evelyn to her feet. He couldn't go through with it. She'd given him life, loved him through every storm. Now it was his turn to stand by her. Whatever Sophie said, his duty to Evelyn was unshakable. The descent was slow, the mountain path stretching endlessly before them. Liam's mind churned with what awaited at home. Sophie wouldn't accept this. She'd made her stance clear. But as the village came into view, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, his resolve hardened. He'd made his choice. Stepping into the house, the warmth of the day gave way to a chilling tension. Sophie stood in the living room, arms crossed, her face a mask of impatience. "Liam," she said sharply, "where have you been?" "I've been waiting for hours." He took a steadying breath, guiding Evelyn to her favorite chair before turning to Sophie. "We went for a walk," he said, his voice low but firm. "I needed time to think." "Think about what?" Sophie demanded, her eyes narrowing. "Have you finally decided?" Liam met her gaze, his heart pounding but his mind clear. "Yes, I love you, Sophie, but I love my mother too. I can't choose between you. I won't." Her face twisted with rage. "What are you saying? I told you it's her or me. You can't keep us both." Liam felt a pang of grief. Once he'd seen a lifetime with Sophie. Now her ultimatum laid bare how far apart they'd grown. "I can't abandon my mother," he said quietly. "She raised me, cared for me when I had nothing. I won't turn my back on her now." Sophie's anger boiled over. She grabbed her coat and began packing, her movements sharp and furious. "If that's how you feel, we're finished. You're choosing her over me. I'm done here." Liam watched, his chest aching, as Sophie stormed around the house, shoving clothes into a suitcase. Evelyn sat silently in the corner, tears glistening in her eyes, but she didn't speak. With a final slam of the door, Sophie vanished into the night, leaving Liam and his mother alone in the stillness. The silence was deafening, but beneath it, Liam felt an odd peace. He'd chosen love. Not the possessive, conditional kind Sophie demanded, but the selfless love Evelyn had shown him all his life. He crossed the room and knelt beside her. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick. "I should have never doubted you." Evelyn smiled through her tears, her hand resting on his cheek. You did what was right, Liam. True love is about sacrifice, not ultimatums. You'll find your way, and one day you'll find someone who sees that too.